three points. One, what is the burden we have as proposition? We say, since this is an opposite motion, all we have to do is prove that there's more harm than good that comes out of humanity. Secondly, conversely, the burden that's on top is to prove that there's more good that comes out of humanity than. Thirdly, what do we mean when we say humanity? We don't think humanity just means humanity of right now. That includes that. There's also points to humanity that has done massive atrocities over the past as well. What's the first argument there? Why humanity entrenches on the well-being of Earth in the first place? The premise of this argument is that humanity has the massive capacity for destruction, and this is because of two reasons. Number one, humans are inherently selfish, and that is why these people always lust for money, they always lust for better infrastructure, they always lust for things like high fashion. But secondly, I think this is magnified because humans uniquely have the ability to collectivize. Because other species cannot create things like buildings, other species cannot create things like Shibumaku, but humanity uniquely has the ability to group together and do all of these things. This means that humanity has a unique incentive and capacity to do things for mass destruction. The implication of this is two things. Number one, that animals are harmed. And I think this is pretty intuitive, right? There's also things like environmental destruction. There's always the reason that we also have to eat animals. And this isn't only for survival. There's also things that are seen as like luxury foods that aren't necessary for your survival, but humans still do it. For example, horse racing, because it just makes them happy. Secondly, let's talk about the environment, because I think the environment is probably going to be degraded by the existence of humanity, and I think this is pretty intrusive, and this also has an impact on future humanity as well, so we cannot say future humanity is going to be necessarily good. The second argument then, no thank you, why humans are unhappy and never fulfilled, and thus we must oppose them. I think there's two sections here. The first section on minorities. I think minorities are massively harmed with the existence of humanity, and that is because of two reasons. Number one, there's a massive political incentive to create us and them narrative. For example, if you want to rally up your voter base, it's not easy to make policies that suddenly cater to everyone. You just have to create an enemy and get everybody on board. But secondly, I think there's also things like historic tensions. Not all of these things are going to be resolved because people still feel trauma. There's also histories and stories that are passed down from generations and generations, and that is why segregation of minorities and racism never actually disappears on their side of the house. The second section on this argument is about the nature of humans. I think there's two characteristics that inherently make humans unhappy, and thus humanity as a whole never fulfilled. Two things. A, humans don't like to be uncertain, but they are always going to be uncertain. This is because even in terms of things like weather, right, you're never able to actually foresee what is going to happen in the future, but humanity always wants to see what is going to happen in the future. But secondly, I think humans are never actually meaningfully fulfilled on their side of the house, and this is because of things like a hedonistic treadmill, right? Because even if humans lust for things, even if humans achieve things, once that becomes the norm, you are never happy. Because when I first started debating, it was just enough for me to break at a national competition. But now when I go to international competitions, the fact that I don't talk, speak, or anything actually creates some sort of mental trauma on me, and that is why people are always going to be unhappy on their side of the house. The implication of this is simple. Humans are born into humanity that is inherently going to be unhappy by the nature of it without consent, and that is something we must protect. I'll take a PY if that is.
Do you support cows?
So I think we support cows if they do not have the same characteristics as humanity in order for us to be principally consistent in this debate. I don't understand why that POI is that relevant. Finally, let me weigh the importance of this argument. I think this is really important because preemptively, even if they might say the vast majority of humanity is getting better, or the vast majority of humanity is happy, we think that minorities are people uniquely without power. It's people who do not have the voice to speak up, and that is why they do not have the same freedom as the people who are already happy in joy. This means that we should not use the minorities to make other people happy, and I think there's really intuitive cases of this, right? For example, a thought experiment. Sure, using one state to make 10 people happy might make the 10 people happy, but we think there's something fundamentally unjust in using those minorities for the greater good. For these reasons, we oppose.
Speech, we will now call upon the leader of opposition for the 5-minute speech. Here.
Can you guys introduce yourself?
All right.
What question? Like my name?
Hi, I'm Narukami, and I'm here why
すみません、自己紹介忘れてたんですけど、今現在購入の小坊リノです。部長をやらせていただいてます。よろしくお願いします。
自己紹介から始めます。鳴上亮と申します。現在高3で、昔リノの前に部長やってました。それでは、I'm gonna start my speech. Lions eat animals, so they do harm to other animals as well. Cows contribute to environmental destruction with methane that they emit through their farts. And if they want to stay principally consistent and ban all animals and oppose all animals, then the only thing they can literally support is things like plants. And even with plants, they rob room for other minority plants to exist. And therefore, if they want to stay principally consistent, they cannot support anything in this debate. Therefore, they have to make their counterfactual clear. They need to do that in a second. I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First, I'm going to reframe what oppose actually means. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why practically the existence of humanity is a good thing. And third, I'm going to talk about even on non-tangible grounds, humanity shall not be opposed. I'm going to take you after my first point. First then, what is actually opposed in this debate? They say that humanities on all levels, like humanities in the past, humanities in the present, humanities in the future should be considered. But we think that this debate is uniquely and only about whether humanities in the present is worth opposing. This is to say, it's really unfair to raise a bunch of things in the past that you had no control over and make that the criteria for you to be decided as worth opposing. Analogy for this is to say we don't oppose a son of a criminal for the crime that one criminal did, right? Therefore, insofar as the humanities in the present had no control over what they could have done in the past, we think that the only people that should be considered in this debate is humanities in the present. I'll move on to my first point then, on practically why existence of humanity in the present is worth not opposing and actually worth supporting. And here's why I continuously engage with their points. Because they say that they try to prove capacity for humans to destroy the environment and try to prove the incentive behind it, but they never prove why those things would manifest actually in a way that destroys the environment. We actually tell you that technological development is more likely to manifest in a way that is positive for the environment. And there's a couple of reasons as to why this is the case too, actually. First, because of laws and regulation decided by the international party, right? An international party like the scientific association of the world dictates most of what science can do in this status quo. And these things are decided by transparent board of directors that come together and discuss, right? If they decide to have destructive things allowed, then that's obviously bad for their reputation. So it's very likely that they would have laws and regulations established in a way that leads to positive development. But secondly, there is a coercive narrative in the status quo that Earth is about to get destroyed. And therefore, humanity in the status quo feel that they need to actually develop technology in a way that saves the environment. Therefore, we think that we actually prove to you that even if the capacity to destroy exists, the incentive doesn't exist, and even if it does, it's not likely to manifest in a way that's harmful for the environment. Sure.
Your entire case is about whether this technological advancement can improve the environment in the future. You said this debate is about the present. Isn't the environment worsening in the present?
No, I think environment is actually getting better in the present. In the 100 years in the past, environmental destruction happened through things like industrial revolution. But in the present, there's more things like green technology that's being developed. So I need to check the stats, but I'm pretty sure it's on the rise in terms of environmental protection and awareness levels. With that, I'm going to move on to the second point. And this is the most important point in this debate. So even on non-tangible, non-pragmatic grounds, humanity shall not be opposed because of its pure nature of it not being evil. And so therefore, I'm going to re-clarify what is actually the metric of oppose. Again, this is not practical. And I already proved to this in my frame, but there's another reasons as to why this is the case. First, in terms of uniqueness, right? As I told you, cows already destroy a lot in terms of the environment, but they do not oppose that, I think. Secondly, it's just intuitively unfair to decide it purely upon practical basis. We love our babies, right? We don't oppose our babies, but our babies poop around the floor, our babies are constantly crying, our babies are literally doing practical harms to us, but we don't oppose them, we love them, right? Therefore, the definition of oppose shouldn't just be on the practical grounds and should also consider the principle ground as well. I'm going to prove then why they are a positive being in its existence. And this is where I raise up the point about empathy. Humans are empathetic people in nature, and this is because of two unique mechanisms that only exist for human beings outside of all other animals. First, because it's genetically ingrained in our DNAs. We are vulnerable. We are not powerful on our own. We only have 2 feet. We can only do very little because we're short and stuff, and so therefore we have to develop through community. Therefore, it's genetically ingrained in us to communicate with each other and be empathetic to each other. and therefore we think that it's genetically ingrained in us to become positive people. Secondly, there are social structures in place, like for example, governments, laws, democracy. All of these things ensures that we are empathetic towards each other and we are nice to each other. Therefore, through these two things, we prove to you that empathy actually exists on the spectrum. With that, I'm going to engage to a point about minorities. They say minorities. Two things here again. First, this is not unique. In most other scenarios, like for example, lions, they literally eat other minority, more vulnerable animals and stuff. So I don't think it exists uniquely for humans. But second, I'm actually going to flip this. Humans are much better for the minorities. Yeah, sure, there's some minorities that are being traumatized in the status quo, but for most minorities, they're being treated better than what they would be in the wild if they were I don't know, like a chicken or something that's gonna get eaten by a lion. At least they don't get killed, right? Therefore, for these reasons, we think that humanity is not worth opposing, they're worth loving. Thank you.
Thank you, Narukami, for your fine speech. We will now like to call on the member of government for the 5-minute speech. Here, here.
Yeah, no, so that. Oh, I'm actually gonna run out of paper.
In an opposed motion, Narukami once told me that you need to prove why harm outweighs the good. What Narukami did in this debate was to prove to you why the harms are not unique. I think that in itself is contradictory. I'm going to talk about three things. One, what is this debate about? Second, I'm going to talk about the environment and animals, recentering that why this is the most important argument of the debate. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about their debate with humanity. Firstly then, on characterization. They say that this debate is only about the current status quo of humanity. I have a couple of responses. One, this debate in itself, by the wording of the motion, is about whether humanity has done more harm than good. What this means, conversely, is to say that humanity, if they have done massive harm in the past, I think this already is a harm that humanity has constructed. That's why this should be the scope of this debate. I think it's our side that is more intuitive. But secondly, I want to note that this is not a policy motion. This is not about coercing this responsibility upon the humanity that exists right now. This is a value judgment on whether or not humanity has done more harm than good, and we oppose against that. It's not about action. I think that's why they're already moving on the level of perception. Secondly, which side is better for animals? Their only pushback in this debate was to say, cow harms other animals too, and cow is analogous, and therefore, why don't you oppose cows as well? One, I want to note that if that was the case, we're perfectly fine with opposing cows as well. I think it was their burden to prove why opposing cows in itself is harmful. But secondly, I think the distinction here is obviously the scale of harm, right? But for instance, like Rino told you about the creation of atomic bomb, and when atomic bomb dropped, it created the inhabitable area in a wider scale, making animals unable to live. Cows do not do that. Obviously, cows might harm other animals in a small, minimized scale, but the harms that humans create are massive. I think it was incomparable on their side of the house. I don't think that is a good case for them. Also, statistically, the level of CO2 is rising dramatically in the past few decades, making it self-evident that the environment is harmed by humans in itself. The second thing I want to point out is, I think it's on the intention and the incentive and the motivation, right? Because if human beings were just like inevitably harming other animals, then it might be slightly better. But the thing is, human beings choose to harm animals and have chosen and will choose to harm animals in the past. This is because human beings are inherently selfish. There was no response coming through that mechanism. Think about the way in which how, for instance, a lot of the animals are brewed to create better forms of things like hunting, for instance. Better forms of, for instance, food. This is not a necessity. This is an overproduction and consumption. I don't think this is going to be the conception in this debate. But even if this debate was only about the current status quo, I want to note that our POI suggested that the environment is aggravated. They say technology, but it was just a magic bullet. They never proved as to what kind of technology will exist to suddenly solve the societal issues magically in the status quo. Notice here that developing nations are still developing. You can still see a lot of massive amounts of CO2 emitted in the south, and a lot of these environmental problems are aggravating. It is statistically true, and it is structurally the case that even if environment per se is not getting worse, I just want you to note that the structure of things like animals being trapped under a bar still exists on their side of the house. Why then is animal debate winning? I'm going to give you 3 weighing mechanisms as to why animals are as important as humans, or even more important on our side of the house. The first one to posit is animals do have the rights for 2 reasons. One, they're sentient beings. The reason why we have things like the notion of rights is to prevent those creatures from being harmed. For instance, right ought not to get tortured, or right ought not to get harmed. Notice here that things like mammals, whales, and dolphins do feel those kind of things on either side of the house. What humans are doing is that they're extracting oil from whales in order to better our lives. This is morally illegitimate. But secondly, I want to note that even if you cannot be sure of what the biology of animals work, you don't simply have epistemic access to what these kind of animals are actually feeling. Because the way in which you actually assume what they're feeling is by seeing their reaction. For instance, the reason why we think that fish don't feel is by seeing their reaction and seeing that fish doesn't react in the same way that humans do not. But we simply do not be sure of that because we don't know what they are feeling, and we're not sure about whether or not fish is feeling in the same way that humans are. That's why you simply cannot authoritatively say that animals are not important. Before I move on, sure.
Can you prove a unique mechanism as to why humans are inherently selfish beings?
Yeah, I already did that in 2 ways, which is the scale of part and the intention. But furthermore, even if it wasn't unique, it's on your side to prove why uniqueness is important. But finally, I'm going to prove to you why animals are the most important argument within the debate. Reparatory principle. So human beings are selfish and can group and bargain, and that's the exact reason why human beings have been harming animals in the past. That's why the reciprocity exists. We must protect animals, even if it comes at an expense of human beings. Animals are important, we win on animals. But even if we don't say that, let's just take a quick look at humanity. The only response for them was to say, there's no uniqueness. But the thing is, we proved to you the uniqueness from first. But even if it wasn't, I don't think that uniqueness can take over this harm, because harm outweighs the good. So proud to propose.
Now I'd like to call upon the member of opposition for their 5 minutes speech. Here.
I'm senior 3 right now. My name is Ouchi. Right. Side proposition in this debate was obsessed with proving why humans have done more harm than good. But that's actually not the burden that they had to prove in this debate. They have to prove by the current state of humanity does more harm than good on a principle level, not on a practical level. And that's what we proved in our first speech, and that's what I'm going to prove in my speech. With that being said, I can move on to 3 things. Number 1, clarifications. Number 2, which side is better for the environment. And number 3, does humans self-destruct as they claim on their systems? So firstly, a few points on clarification. The first point is that I just want to clarify what this motion means. We think that proposition should oppose the current generation because of all the analytical mechanisms that we gave you in first. It was not enough for them in second to just say, well, it's more intuitive that way, right? We gave you multiple reasons, such as why the current generation should not be punished for the crimes that the later generations may have committed. For example, even if my father was a murderer, I shouldn't be put to death because of the fact that my father was a murderer. They needed to prove why this is actually more intuitive. I don't think it's more intuitive. No, thank you. But the second thing I want to point out is that the characterization of humanity means all humanity. That includes dictators, and while that includes dictators, like heads of corporations, that also includes you guys, right? That also includes us, which have probably done nothing bad for the environment and etc. That means that proposition has to defend all humans on this planet. But the third thing I want to point out is that the scale of harm isn't actually important in this debate because this is a principal motion. And I'm going to prove this through things like analogies. For example, babies do a lot of practical harms, right? As Narukami said, they poop on you and etc. But the thing is, we don't oppose babies because of the fact that, opposing babies is just inherently very, very bad. And same goes for the elderly, right? What that means, no thank you, is that the scale of harm isn't important. It's the principle bad and the principle good that's going to win us this debate. With that being said, I'll move on to my first point on which side is better for the environment. The proposition thrust went as follows. They said that we disrupt the well-being of the earth because we cause environmental damages and stuff like that. 3 major rebuttals. Number 1, all species cause environmental damages. For example, beavers change their habitat to suit themselves, right? So in order for them to be principally consistent, then they also have to oppose life in general because all life on this planet changes the environment. But the second thing I want to point out is that our argument was that current generation is actually benefiting the environment in many, many ways because the vast majority of individuals in the current of humanity actually understands the harms to the environment and wants to protect the environment. It's the top 1% of people, the heads of corporations that are actually harming the environment. That is why we are principally better in this debate. But the third thing I just want to point out is that the proposition burden was to prove what humans uniquely is principally bad. Because, for example, when bears eat fish, you're breaking the principle that they introduced in this debate, which probably means that they also oppose bears in this debate. No, thank you. That is why they have to prove the uniqueness of their arguments. They can't just say that we have to do it as well, because we did. But the second thing, so moving on to my second question, on which side does humanity actively self-destruct? So what they claim on their side of the house is we have the capacity for self-destruction because we harm the minority in the vast majority of instances. I'm gonna disprove this in 2 major ways. Number 1, I just want to point out that this argument is symmetric because as we pointed out in Narukami's speech, all species harm the environment, condemn the minority to failure. This is because of simple natural selection, right? You don't want the minority to pass on their genes because of the fact that it's harmful for your future. What that means is that if they are going to oppose things like self-destruction, harming the minority, then they have to oppose all life on this planet because all life on this planet goes through the same selection process that we went through on our side of the house. But the second thing I just want to point out is that we're not actually doing this in the status quo. Because in the vast majority of instances, the minority is condemned to failure because of the birth lottery, because they were born into poor neighborhoods, because they were born into poor countries. So thank you. What that means is that this birth lottery is not reliant on the current generation of humanity. For example, the current generation did not create segregation, did not create the idea of slavery. Then why then does the current generation have to be punished for these crimes? I don't understand that. They never put that on their side of the house. The final thing I want to point out is just on the weighing, right? So the weighing in this debate is that what side proposition had to defend was why for all humans on this planet, we oppose all humans on this planet. So the proposition burden was all humans, where the vast majority of burdens are actively segregating the minority or actively harming the environment. And this is where we have a reality check. Because the only people who are actively harming the minority, the only people who are actively harming the environment are the top 1%, or the heads of corporations, or dictators who actively harm the minority. And the vast majority of individuals actually know this and are trying to fight against it. That is why we oppose.
for your fine speech. And now we would like to call upon the reply speaker from the opposition side for their 3-minute speech. Here.
Once again, I'm Rino Narukami. I'll begin my speech. The strategic note that I want to point at the top is that they keep on using the word principally consistent to try to protect their case from overwhelms. But if they want to stay principally consistent, then as Ouchi tells you, they have to oppose all living things, including things like, for example, plants. Because plants, the existence of one plant takes room away from another plant that is more vulnerable. Therefore, if the world that they're supporting under principally consistent is where there's no plants, there's no animals, there's no humans, then it's very likely that that world isn't even important to begin with. Therefore, the stance that they have to actually take in this debate is to say, yeah, we oppose humans, but we support things like animals and plants existing. But in that case, we win this debate. Because what we tell you is that they're equally as destructive. We told you already from the first speaker that cows don't own nuclear weapons, but their farts are one of the top reasons why islands are sinking the status quo. Dengue fever that has infected mosquitoes destroyed billions of people's lives in the status quo. Therefore, the world that they're supporting is equally as destructive. The failure to engage that just lost in the debate. I'm going to reframe what this debate is about by re-clarifying what oppose is that we told you continuously from first. We proved to you, all from first, and we're consistent, that oppose isn't just about practical. Look at their logical failure to actually contextualize why oppose should just mainly be on the practical basis. They give no examples, no analysis as to why they are the side that should be bought. Why are we superior in terms of logic then? We told you a lot of analysis as to why this is the case, right? We told you things like babies. They are practically harmful, but we love them, right? We don't oppose them and stuff. Therefore, we think that the criteria for what should actually be opposed is things like, for example, personality and the inherent characteristic that exists within that species. And what we tell you is that therefore, humanity is better than most of the other alternatives that they raise. Because most of the points that they say could be symmetricized. First of all, things like the environment. The incentive to be selfish and be environmentally destructive is completely symmetric on either side insofar as you want to survive as an animal. What we tell you is we actually flip this. Humans are uniquely aware. Humans are the only ones that have access to these things like science that have knowledge over things like environmental destruction. So we are the only people that can actually defend the world and be climate aware. Therefore, we actually flip our analysis and tell you that we're better for these people. Second, in terms of minorities, look at the real world and how wide it's conflict. They literally need other vulnerable actors to say as survivable. However, what humans do is, even if we imprison, for example, Uyghurs as a minority of instances, in most of the scenario, the brutal racism that exists isn't as harmful as being bitten off alive, and therefore we think that for minorities, we're actually better as well. But then third, the point that never gets engagement into, which is about empathy, right? Humans are empathetic creatures in nature. We told you this all the way from first, that it's genetically ingrained in our DNAs for our survival to stay as a community and be empathetic towards each other. So humans in nature are creatures that should be worth being loved, not opposed, and for those reasons, we're incredibly proud to take it today.
Hi, I'm Seiji. I'm the Fukubucho for MAD. All right. If every single other living species can perpetuate as much harm as humans do, then we are completely fine with opposing every single living being on the planet. Because even if we were to oppose every single living being on the planet, that still fulfills our burden on proving to you that humanity has and will cause more harm than good. I don't understand any of opposition's arguments on pushing the uniqueness, on cow farts, on babies, when they themselves cannot prove to you a unique benefit. I think that is why we take this debate. I'm going to firstly clarify what the scope of humanity is, then get into two questions. Regarding the scope of humanity, what we tell you is that the past and and present forms of humanity are within the scope of this debate, to which opposition says, well, no, we shouldn't hold past people accountable, and they give you the crime family example. I want to say two things here. Firstly, that multiple governments, British government, Japanese government, have paid reparations for past actions that they've committed. Humanity does hold people accountable for past actions, whether that be themselves or the past forms of their existence. But secondly, the perpetuation and continuation of past forms of things like segregation, racism, and sexism still exists in the status quo. Because people collectively can put a stop to racism if they all do so, and yet people haven't. We think that even if the past people have started it, the fact that the current people are continuing it brings us this debate. Two questions. Firstly, humans hiring and harming other species. We basically tell you that humans cause mass harm to hundreds of other species. Their response is, well, look at lions. Note that not only does this not stand, but as Nagi points out in his speech, the extent of harm is much larger, and the burden of proof in our debate is to prove to you that the harms outweigh the benefits. Because the benefits cows bring outweighs the harms, that is why we keep them alive. But the harms that humans bring significantly outweighs the benefits, as the entire case has been about. And moving on to our second question, humans harming themselves, we get two main things from opposition bench. Firstly, they say, well, we don't oppose babies, to which we say, that's because babies have future utilitarian benefit that we are investing in. So we are completely fine with opposing babies if that means that if babies cannot grow up in the future. We think that babies are only harmful if they do not grow in the future. We completely oppose babies. The second thing is basically them saying, well, it's just the heads of corporations, and government has a burden to prove to you that the majority of humans are causing this harm. To which we say no, right? Because if one person can bring enough harm to outweigh every single benefit that the 7.9 other billion people in the world has brought, then that is our burden. Because we don't have to prove to you that the majority of individuals have brought harm. We just have to prove to you that the harms that a single human has brought outweighs every other benefit that proposition brings. We think that we have fulfilled this burden by pushing to everything else. Finally, I want to note the lack of engagement from opposition bench, because from Rino's speech, she spends a minute on mechanizing the entire argument on the hedonistic treadmill, to which we get no engagement. Note how stupid this is for their side. I think that it is only intuitive that we oppose humans for the harms that they cause to themselves and for every other species. Proud to propose.
Rino, Narukami, Natsuki, Ouchi ありがとうございました。これでディベートのスピーチは終了です。ここから、投票をしていきたいと思います。まずディベートはお楽しみいただけたでしょうか。Okay, we're glad that you enjoyed it. Now I would like to move on to voting. これから決を取るので、手を挙げてください。Please raise your hand if you think affirmative side, government side, was more persuasive. 肯定側が良かった人は手を挙げてください。次は反対側、so opposition, who thought opposition was more persuasive?
I voted for you guys.
6です。6対その他で、ガバメントの勝ちです。本日は、見ていただきありがとうございました。ぜひまた、来年も英語ディベートに来てください。ありがとうございます。